Snow fell in thick, lazy flakes across the Montana plains that Christmas Eve of 1889, blanketing the world in silence. From the grand ranch house on the hill came the glow of lanterns and the faint strains of a fiddle, laughter rolling out into the night. Down below, in the dark of the horse barn, Evelyn Murphy huddled in a pile of straw, her wedding dress torn and stiff with cold. "Please," she whispered through the crack in the barn door, voice hoarse and trembling. "Just a piece of bread." Her stomach cramped so badly she could barely breathe. She'd been hiding in that barn for 2 days, eating nothing, sleeping little, praying the snow would stop seeping through the boards. The horses snorted softly, their warmth the only kindness she'd known since arriving. The sound of boots crunching through snow made her flinch. A man's silhouette filled the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, a lantern in one hand. "What the hell are you doing out here?" His voice was deep, rough from wind and work. She looked up, blinking against the light, her lips pale and cracked. The man's eyes caught the shimmer of her wedding dress, the lace dirty and torn, her bare fingers blue from cold. His face hardened, jaw tightening as he looked back toward the lit house. "Get up," he said quietly, but with a force that left no room for argument. "You're coming home." Her name was Evelyn Murphy, 24 years old, come west on a promise. The man before her would later tell her his name was James Callahan, ranch foreman and part owner, just returned from cattle drive. But right then, she only knew him as the stranger who'd caught her shame and her fear in a single glance. She tried to stand, but her legs gave out, sending her back into the hay. James set the lantern down, crouched, and pulled his coat around her shoulders. "Easy," he muttered, his breath visible in the cold air. "How long have you been out here?" Her answer came out in broken whispers. She had arrived 3 days ago by stagecoach, expecting to meet her husband-to-be, Mr. Thomas Thornton. He had sent letters for months, gentle words, careful promises, a picture of a man she thought decent. But when she stepped off the coach, the man who met her was different, colder, crueler. He'd said there was a mistake, that she could stay in the barn until things were sorted. The next day, she learned the truth. Thomas Thornton already had a wife. The bride ad he'd posted back east had been nothing but bait for free labor, maybe something darker. She pointed toward the glowing house with a shaking hand. "He's in there," she said softly, with her. James froze. He'd known Thomas for years, worked beside him, built that ranch with his own hands. "His wife's in there?" "Yes," Evelyn whispered. "He told me to clean the stalls. Said I should earn my keep. Lock me in at night. I haven't eaten since yesterday morning." James's face went dark, eyes like storm clouds. "You mean to tell me that bastard brought you here, made you think you would be his wife, and then locked you in this barn?" Evelyn could only nod. "I thought maybe if I just did what he said." Her voice trailed off. She didn't finish. She didn't have to. The rage that flared across James's face said he understood enough. He stood, towering over her, his coat now hanging around her like a blanket. "Can you walk?" She hesitated, then nodded weakly. "Good," he said, voice low but steady. "You're not spending Christmas in a barn." He lifted her easily, her small frame weightless in his arms. The snow outside hit his face like shards of glass as he strode toward the house. Inside, music and laughter carried on. The great hall of the Thornton Ranch was packed. 15 guests, glasses raised, a roaring fire blazing. Thomas Thornton stood near the piano, one arm around his well-dressed wife, a smug grin on his face. The door burst open. Every head turned. Wind and snow swept in with James Callahan, his coat open, his arms full of a woman in a ruined white dress. Evelyn's head lolled weakly against his shoulder, her skin ghost pale. "When were you going to tell me," James said, his voice booming through the room, "that you brought a slave to my ranch?" The music died. Silence fell, so thick you could hear the logs pop in the fire. Thomas blinked, mouth working but no sound coming out. "Your ranch?" he finally sputtered. You manage what I built, James snapped, stepping closer. Half this land is mine, Thornton, and I didn't build it for this. Murmurs rippled through the room. Someone gasped. Mrs. Thornton, real wife, stood frozen, face white as chalk. Evelyn stirred in James's arms, barely conscious, shivering uncontrollably. James's voice cut through the hush. You'll all witness this now. She's mine. Thomas's jaw dropped. You can't just... You want to talk about what I can't do? James barked. You think I don't know you've been skimming profits? I've got ledgers. I've got proof. His gaze softened as he looked down at Evelyn. Do you want to stay here? He asked her gently. Her lips trembled. I want to leave, she whispered. But I have nowhere. Yes, you do, he said simply. Without another word, he turned and strode out into the snow again. The party erupted in shouts, Thomas yelling threats, but James didn't look back. He saddled 2 horses by lamplight, wrapping Evelyn in blankets and lifting her onto one. The wind bit hard, but she didn't feel it, just the strength of his arms steadying her. Why are you helping me? She asked softly as they rode into the storm. James's answer came after a long moment, his voice rough with memory. Because I know what it's like to be thrown away. The snow swallowed their trail behind them as the lights of the ranch faded into the distance. And for the first time in days, Evelyn let herself believe she might survive the night. Evelyn woke to the smell of bacon and coffee. For a moment, she thought she'd dreamed the rescue, that she was still in the cold barn with the horses breathing around her and frost biting her fingers. But when she opened her eyes, she saw a low wooden ceiling, a small window rimed with ice, and sunlight spilling across a quilted blanket. She sat up too quickly, dizzy from warmth after days of hunger. The nightgown she wore was soft, clean, and clearly not hers. Her heart pounded in panic. Where was she? What had he done with her dress? Her gaze darted around the cabin. A tidy room with a cast-iron stove, a rocking chair by the fire, shelves lined with books and jars. Then she saw him. James Callahan stood at the stove, sleeves rolled up, hair damp from snow melt, turning bacon in a pan. He didn't look at her at first. You're awake, he said simply. Good. His voice was calm, but she heard the weight behind it, the kind of voice that carried command without trying. He set a plate on the table, scrambled eggs, bacon, biscuits, and a small jar of berry jam. She stared at it, not moving. Is this mine? She asked softly. All of it, he said, still not meeting her eyes. There's more if you want. She hesitated, half expecting him to laugh, to snatch it away. When he didn't, she picked up a fork and took a bite. The taste was so rich it made her eyes sting. She ate slowly at first, then faster, tears running down her cheeks. James busied himself with the stove, pretending not to see. Only when her plate was empty did he sit across from her, folding his hands. You can stay here as long as you need, he said. Door locked from the inside. I sleep in the loft. Evelyn blinked, unsure how to answer. I have no money, she whispered. No way to repay you. His jaw tightened, not in anger, but something like sorrow. I'm not asking for repayment. Silence filled the cabin except for the crackle of fire. Why? She asked finally. James looked away toward the window, his face shadowed. Because someone should have done it for my sister. The words hung heavy between them. Evelyn said nothing, waiting. He sighed and leaned back in his chair. Caroline was 16. 3 years ago, a man promised her marriage. Letters, talk of a fine house in Helena. Turned out he ran a brothel. His voice roughened. I found her too late. Fever took her not long after. She died thinking it was her fault. Evelyn's throat closed. I'm so sorry, she whispered. James nodded once, eyes fixed on the fire. I should have protected her. I can't change that, but maybe I can make it right this time. Evelyn reached out without thinking, resting her fingers lightly on his hand. It wasn't your fault, she said, and meant it. He didn't pull away. The stillness between them shifted. Not awkward, but gentle, like something broken beginning to mend. As afternoon sunlight crept across the floor, Evelyn found herself moving carefully around the cabin, learning its corners. She helped wash the dishes, folded blankets, stoked the fire. James didn't stop her, but watched quietly, as if making sure she didn't overdo it. When evening came, he surprised her again. "Thought we'd make a proper Christmas dinner," he said, setting a chicken on the table. She blinked. "Tonight? After all that? Especially tonight." They cooked together awkwardly at first, she chopping vegetables, he peeling potatoes with the wrong end of the knife. When he burned a biscuit, she couldn't help laughing, a soft sound she hadn't made in months. He grinned sheepishly. "Don't say a word." "I wouldn't dream of it," she teased. The small cabin filled with the scent of roasting chicken and baked bread, warmth spreading from stove to heart. When they sat down to eat, the storm outside had gone quiet. For the first time since she'd stepped off the stagecoach, Evelyn felt something close to peace. After dinner, James rummaged through a drawer and pulled out a small, wrapped parcel. "I was going to give this to someone else," he said quietly, "but I think she'd want you to have it." Evelyn unwrapped the paper and gasped. Inside was a tiny bird carved from wood, wings spread mid-flight. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tracing the fine details. "I made it for Caroline. Never got the chance to give it to her." His voice softened. "She always said she wanted to fly. I figured she'd want someone else to have that chance." Evelyn cradled the little bird in both hands as if it were made of glass. "I don't know how to thank you," she murmured. James shook his head. "You don't have to. Just live, eat, rest. That'll be enough." She looked at him then, really looked. The lines of his face, the quiet sadness in his eyes, the steadiness that felt like safety. "What happens when I leave?" she asked. He met her gaze for the first time that night. "Do you want to leave?" She hesitated, the question heavier than she'd expected. "I don't know where I'd go." "Then don't," he said simply. "Not yet." Later, in the small bed warmed by quilts, Evelyn lay awake holding the carved bird to her chest. Through the floorboards, she heard James moving in the loft above, restless, pacing. She wanted to tell him she wasn't afraid anymore, that she hadn't felt hunger since she woke. But she only whispered in the dark, "I think I could stay forever." The fire popped softly. Outside, the wind had stopped. In the silence, she felt something new take root, fragile, uncertain, but alive. She drifted to sleep with that thought in her heart, unaware that somewhere miles away, Thomas Thornton was already planning to get her back. For now, though, it was Christmas morning, and for the first time in a long time, she was warm, safe, and not alone. The morning light came through the frosted window, pale and soft against the log walls of the cabin. Evelyn woke to the quiet sound of boots moving on the porch, the creak of wood, the rhythmic clatter of buckets. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and peeked outside. James was already up, his breath fogging in the cold air as he poured grain for the chickens. It had been a week since that Christmas morning, and the days had taken on a rhythm she'd begun to crave. Simple, steady kind. After breakfast, she joined him outside, fumbling through the chores he showed her. Feeding hens, mending fences, brushing the horses. It all felt strange at first, her city hands clumsy with tools, but he was patient, never mocking, always steady. "You're a quick learner," he said one afternoon when she managed to tie a rope not properly. "You make a decent ranch hand yet." She laughed, breath white in the air. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" "Highest one I got," he said with a grin. The snow was melting a little by then, sun glinting off the fields, and sometimes they'd work in companionable silence. The only sounds there, boots crunching in snow and the creak of saddle leather. One morning she slipped on a patch of ice, nearly falling, and he caught her by the waist. For a heartbeat, they stayed like that. Too close, his hands warm through the fabric of her coat, her eyes wide and startled. Neither spoke. As she stepped back quickly, cheeks flushed, pretending to brush off snow while he turned away and cleared his throat. That evening, as firelight flickered over the cabin walls, Evelyn told him the rest of her story. She sat on the rug near the fire, arms around her knees, and spoke in a voice that trembled only once. She'd been orphaned at 12, she said, living in Boston with an aunt and uncle who treated her as little more than a servant. Her uncle gambled, her aunt drank. One night, when her uncle lost badly, he threatened to sell her off to pay his debts. That's when I answered the ad, she said, staring into the flames. It seemed like hope, a man promising kindness, a home, maybe even love. I thought it was my way out. She described the train journey, days of dust, miles of hope, and how her heart had sunk when Thomas Thornton met her at the station with that hard smile. He said there'd been a misunderstanding, that his wife was unwell. He'd marry me later. Her voice cracked. Instead, he locked me in the barn and told me I owed him work for the cost of my fare. James sat listening, jaw tight, hands clasped between his knees. He's lucky I didn't find out sooner, he said finally, low and dangerous. Evelyn looked at him, surprised by the fury in his eyes. But beneath, it was something gentler too. You're safe now, he said, more softly. I promise you that. She believed him. She didn't know why, but she did. A few days later, James hitched the wagon for a trip to town. Need supplies, he said. You should come. No reason to hide anymore. The thought of seeing people again made her stomach twist. What if someone recognizes me? What if they tell him? Thornton's gone, James said. Left 2 days after Christmas. Word is he headed west to Oregon. He won't bother you again. The ride into town was quiet, the world bright and blinding under the snow. When they reached the main street, folks stopped and stared. Whispers followed her like wind. But then Mrs. Larson, a stout woman with kind eyes, came over. You're the mail-order bride, she said softly. We heard what he did. Shameful man. You poor thing. Evelyn blinked, not expecting sympathy. Soon others approached, men tipping hats, women nodding kindly. It wasn't pity, it was something warmer. Understanding. For the first time, she felt like maybe she wasn't the one who should be ashamed. Inside the general store, while James bartered for feed and nails, the clerk glanced between them. This your wife? He asked casually. James hesitated, then nodded once. That's right. Evelyn froze, but said nothing. On the way home, she stared out at the passing snow. Why didn't you correct him? She asked finally. James kept his eyes on the road. Easier if they think that. Protects you. She nodded slowly. I understand. A long silence followed, filled only by the creak of the wagon and the clop of hoofs. Then she said, so quietly he almost missed it. But if you wanted it to be true, I wouldn't object. He glanced at her, startled, but she didn't look back. Her cheeks were pink, eyes fixed on the snowy horizon. That night, back at the cabin, they unloaded supplies in silence. Their hands brushed when they both reached for the same sack of flour, and time seemed to stop again. His rough fingers closed around hers. She didn't pull away. He cupped her face gently, thumb brushing her cheek. Evelyn, he began, voice unsteady. But before he could finish, a loud knock echoed through the cabin. They sprang apart. James opened the door to find a man in a long coat and badge standing in the snow. Evening, the stranger said. U.S. Marshal Sam Hawkins from Helena. I'm looking for Miss Evelyn Murphy. Evelyn's stomach dropped. That's me, she said, barely audible. The marshal removed his hat. There's been a complaint filed. Theft of property and kidnapping. James's face hardened. By who? A man named Thomas Thornton. The marshal's eyes flicked between them. Mind if I come in? The warmth of the cabin suddenly felt suffocating. James stepped in front of her. She's not property, he said evenly, and she's free to leave any time she wants. The marshal held up a hand. I just need to hear her say it. He turned to Evelyn. Ma'am, are you here willingly? Her fear burned away in that moment, replaced by something fiercer. She straightened her back. Completely willingly, she said. This man saved my life. The marshal studied her face, then nodded. That's good enough for me. But Thornton's lawyer may try to push this in court. You might want to make your arrangement official. He tipped his hat and left, his horse's hooves fading into the night. James stood silent for a long moment, staring at the door. Evelyn waited. "There's one way to stop him from trying again," he said finally. She knew before he spoke the word. "Marriage." He nodded slowly. "Would protect you legally. Paper only, if that's what you want. Separate rooms, no expectations." Evelyn stood, heart pounding. "And if I wanted more than that?" He froze, eyes searching hers. "Evelyn, you've been kind," she said, voice trembling but sure. "Patient. You make me laugh. I feel safe with you. Seen. I don't want a paper marriage, James. I want a real one." He looked torn apart, like a man who'd buried his heart too long. "I'm not a good man," he said roughly. "I've done things I don't care," she whispered. "I care about the man who gave me his coat, who cooked me breakfast, who gave me his sister's bird." Something broke open in him then. He crossed to her, took her hands, and said, "Then marry me. Not for safety, not for law. Marry me because I wake up grateful you're here. Because your laugh's the best sound in this cabin. Because I want every morning to start with you." Tears filled her eyes. "Yes," she said, voice shaking. "God, yes." When he kissed her, it was slow, reverent, full of everything they'd both been too afraid to feel. Outside, snow fell again, soft, silent, forgiving. And inside that small cabin, two broken souls began to build something whole. But just before dawn, Evelyn woke to the sound of hoofbeats, fast, angry. James grabbed his rifle and looked out the window. Through the pale light, she saw the man she'd feared most riding toward them, drunk and wild-eyed. Thomas Thornton. He dismounted, gun in hand, shouting into the cold, "She's mine. You stole what's mine." The past, it seemed, had come calling again. The sharp winter wind howled outside the cabin as dawn broke gray and cold. Thomas Thornton stood in the yard, wild-eyed, coat flapping, shouting for Evelyn like a man possessed. James's rifle was already in his hands, though he kept the barrel low. "Stay inside," he ordered, voice tight. Evelyn's heart pounded as she watched through the frosted window. Thomas's face was red, his breath smoky in the frigid air, his words slurred. "She's mine, Callahan. You stole what's mine," he bellowed. James stepped forward, boots crunching through the snow. "You best put that gun down, Thornton, before you do something you can't take back." Thomas sneered, raising the weapon. "You think you could take everything from me? My ranch, my wife, my—" But before he could finish, a shout came from the trail behind him. "Drop it, Thornton." It was Marshal Hawkins, flanked by two deputies. They must have followed him from town. Thomas froze, panic flickering in his eyes as the marshal rode closer. "We got statements," Hawkins called. "From your wife, from the hands at the ranch, from everyone you cheated. It's over." Thomas's arm trembled. For a second, it seemed he might shoot anyway, but then the gun slipped from his grasp and thudded into the snow. Hawkins dismounted, his deputies moving fast, restraining Thornton as he shouted curses and threats. Evelyn stood in the doorway now, trembling, one hand over her mouth. "You can't keep me locked up forever." Thomas roared, "She's nothing without me." The marshal's face was hard. "That's where you're wrong. She's free. You're the one who's finished." They hauled him away, his shouts fading into the distance. Evelyn felt her knees go weak, and James caught her before she fell. For a long while, she just stood there in his arms, listening to the wind. Later, by the fire, Hawkins returned to explain. "Your husband's wife gave testimony," he said to Evelyn. "Said he forced her to keep quiet about everything. We've got him for embezzlement, fraud, false imprisonment, and assault. With both your statements, he won't see daylight for years." When the marshal left, peace settled over the cabin, fragile but real. James turned to Evelyn, his expression unreadable. "It's done," he said softly. "You're free." She nodded, but her chest still ached. "Free," she repeated, as if testing the word. Days passed quietly after that. The snow thickened again, softening the world into silence. They worked together, repaired the barn roof, cooked, talked late into the night. But something in the air between them had changed since the marshal's visit. Something unsaid but heavy, a question waiting to be asked. One evening, as dusk painted the sky pale blue, James poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from her. "There's one way to make sure he never comes near you again," he said. Evelyn met his gaze, knowing before he spoke. "Marriage," she murmured. He nodded. "It'd be legal. No one could challenge it. Paper only, if that's all you want. I'd never ask more than you're willing to give." She set her cup down carefully. "And if I wanted more than that?" His brows drew together. "Evelyn, I've been thinking about that night," she said, voice low. "When you came into the barn, you said you knew what it was like to be thrown away." She looked up, eyes glistening. "I don't feel thrown away anymore. I feel found." He looked as if she'd struck him, all that quiet control unraveling in a single heartbeat. "You don't know what you're saying." "Yes, I do." She rose, standing before him, trembling but firm. "You've been kind, patient. You make me laugh, and you make me feel safe. I want a life with you, James. Not a paper marriage, a real one." He stood too, staring down at her, torn between desire and disbelief. "I'm not a good man," he said hoarsely. "I've done things, fought men, hurt men, lost my temper. I'm not gentle. You were gentle with me," she said simply. "That's all that matters." The air between them grew still, the only sound the ticking of the clock. Then he took a slow step toward her, then another. "Evelyn Murphy," he said, voice shaking, "will you marry me? Not because you need protection, but because I want to wake up every morning with you beside me. Because I want to build something that lasts." She didn't answer with words, just rose on her toes and kissed him. It was soft, almost hesitant at first, then deeper, full of every promise they couldn't speak aloud. When they finally broke apart, her forehead rested against his chest, both of them breathless. "Yes," she whispered, "I'll marry you." The days that followed were filled with quiet joy. They planned a small wedding for New Year's Day in the town church. Mrs. Larson agreed to stand as witness, and word spread fast. Folks wanted to see the ending to the story everyone in town had been whispering about. James used what savings he had to buy out Thornton's half of the ranch, signing papers at the sheriff's office while Evelyn watched from the doorway. "It's ours now," he said with a smile when it was done. "All of it." She felt tears sting her eyes. "I never thought I'd be happy again." He brushed a hand over her hair. "Neither did I." That night they sat by the fire, plans spread out on the table. Lists of repairs, names of neighbors to invite, what color ribbon she liked best. Evelyn laughed when he tried to draw a picture of her dress. "That's supposed to be me? Art's not my calling," he said with a grin. "Good thing you're marrying me for my cooking." She swatted his arm playfully, and for the first time in years, she felt like a normal woman again, not someone haunted by shame or hunger. But just before dawn on New Year's Eve, the sound of hooves shattered the stillness once more. James was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand. Evelyn joined him at the window, her heart sinking. A lone rider approached fast through the snow, a dark figure hunched in the saddle. "No," she breathed. "It can't be." But as the horse drew nearer, the truth was plain. Thomas Thornton, drunk, filthy, eyes blazing with madness, and a pistol gleaming in his fist. He dismounted and staggered toward the cabin, shouting her name into the frozen air. "Evelyn, you're mine. You hear me? Mine." James's voice was calm but deadly. "Stay back from the window," he said. "This ends tonight." And as he stepped outside into the cold dawn light, the future of everything they'd built hung by the thinnest thread of hope. Snow lashed against the cabin walls like shards of glass as Thomas Thornton thundered up to the porch, his horse frothing with sweat and rage. James pushed Evelyn gently behind him, rifle steady in his grip. "Stay back," he murmured, his voice quiet but iron hard. Thomas kicked the door open, face twisted, drunk and filthy, eyes red from fury and whiskey. "You think you can take what's mine?" he slurred, stumbling inside. "That ranch was mine, that woman mine." His hand shook as he raised the gun, the barrel glinting in the firelight. James didn't flinch. "You lost everything yourself," he said evenly. "You lied, you stole, you starved her. Now leave before you do something you can't fix." Thomas's laugh came out a snarl. "Fix? You can't fix what's broken. She was supposed to be my new start. You stole her." He swung the gun toward James's chest. Evelyn stepped forward before she could think. "No," she cried. "Stop this, Thomas." His head snapped toward her, face contorted with something that looked almost like grief before curdling into hate. "You think you're better than me now?" he spat. "You think anyone will believe you weren't begging for it?" "I begged for food," she said coldly. "Not you." The words hit him like a slap. He lunged toward her, gun rising, but James moved faster, knocking the barrel aside as it fired, the shot exploding into the ceiling. "You'll hang for this," James growled, shoving him back. Thomas swung wildly, the two men crashing against the table, sending dishes and papers flying. Evelyn screamed as the rifle clattered to the floor. For a moment it was chaos. Boots on wood, fists, the thud of bodies against the wall. Then a new sound broke through. Hooves. Many of them. The door burst open again, and Marshal Hawkins stormed in, deputies behind him, pistols drawn. "Drop the weapon, Thornton." Hawkins barked. "Now." Thomas froze, panting wild-eyed. "You don't understand. She's mine. We got your wife's testimony," Hawkins interrupted sharply. "She told us everything about the false ads, the money you stole, the women you tricked. You're done." The fight drained out of Thomas's face, replaced by despair. For a heartbeat, he looked like a man realizing his whole life had turned to dust. Then, with a snarl, he lunged for Evelyn. "If I can't have you, no one will." But James was already there, tackling him hard to the ground. The gun went off again, the sound deafening, the smell of gunpowder filling the room. When it cleared, James had him pinned, blood trickling from a cut on his temple, but eyes steady and burning. The deputies rushed forward, pulling Thomas up, shackling his wrists as he cursed and spat. "You'll regret this," he screamed, voice hoarse. "You'll both regret it." The marshal looked at him coldly. "Save your breath. You'll have plenty of time to talk where you're going." As they dragged him out into the snow, his voice grew smaller, swallowed by the wind. Evelyn stood frozen, trembling so hard she could barely stand. James dropped the rifle, crossing to her in 2 steps. "It's over," he whispered, catching her before she collapsed. "He can't touch you. Not ever again." She buried her face against his chest, sobbing with a force that wrung her empty. He held her until her shaking slowed, until all that was left was quiet breathing and the soft crackle of the fire. Marshal Hawkins lingered at the doorway. Mrs. Thornton, the real one, came forward, he said gently. Said she'd been terrified of him for years. With her and Miss Murphy both testifying, he'll go away for a long time. You've done nothing wrong. He tipped his hat. "Happy New Year, ma'am. And congratulations on your upcoming wedding." When they were gone, the cabin felt achingly still. The world outside was silent again, as if the land itself was holding its breath. James helped her sit by the fire, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling, but there was a new strength in her face. "He's really gone?" she whispered. "He's gone," James said, "and he's never coming back." For the first time, she let herself believe it. They sat together long into the night, the flames painting gold across their faces. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "You don't owe me thanks," he replied. "Just a future." She smiled faintly through her tears. "Then we'll have one." Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and quiet, covering the blood-stained tracks in a blanket of white. The old year was dying. A new one waited just beyond the horizon. When dawn came, clear and golden, the church bells in town began to ring. Evelyn stood at the window, watching the light spill over the hills. Behind her, James buttoned his clean shirt, the one he'd saved for special days. "You ready?" he asked. She turned, eyes shining, more than I've ever been. The nightmare had ended, but something else, something bright and whole, was just beginning. Morning sunlight poured through the frosted window of the cabin like liquid gold, touching everything it found. Her wedding dress folded neatly on the chair, the small carved bird resting on the table, the pair of boots by the fire where James had left them before heading into town. Evelyn stirred, waking slowly, blinking at the unfamiliar quiet. For the first time in years, her first thought wasn't fear, it was peace. She rose, brushed out her hair, and opened the door to the cold air, crisp and clean. On the horizon, smoke curled from the church chimney. It was New Year's Day, 1890, and in a few short hours, she would be someone's wife. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. A knock startled her. She turned to find Mrs. Larson and 3 other town women on the porch, cheeks pink from the cold, carrying bundles of cloth and flowers. "We heard," Mrs. Larson said with a grin. "We came to help." Before Evelyn could speak, they were bustling inside, laying out an ivory dress with lace sleeves, ribbons for her hair, and a little bouquet of winter blossoms wrapped in twine. "Every bride deserves to feel beautiful," one of them said, her eyes warm. Evelyn tried to protest, but tears blurred her vision. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You don't need to," Mrs. Larson said, tightening the last ribbon in her braid. "Just be happy. The whole town wants that for you." Evelyn caught her reflection in the small mirror by the stove and gasped quietly. The woman staring back wasn't the broken, hungry soul from the barn. She looked alive, glowing, strong. When the sleigh arrived to take her to town, the women followed her out, waving, their faces bright against the snow. The church was small, whitewashed, and filled to the brim. Word had traveled fast. Everyone wanted to see the mail-order bride who'd survived scandal and found love anyway. James stood at the altar in his best suit, hair neatly combed, looking like a man who didn't quite know what to do with his hands. When he saw her step through the doorway, he froze, eyes widening, a smile spreading slow and certain across his face. The organ began to play softly. Evelyn walked down the aisle alone, no father to give her away. But halfway down, Mrs. Larson rose, then others followed, the entire congregation standing as she passed, silent and proud. James's throat worked as he fought for composure. When she reached him, he took her hands as though afraid she might vanish if he let go. The preacher cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved," he began, voice echoing through the warm little room, "we gather on this first morning of the new year to witness the joining of James Callahan and Evelyn Murphy in holy matrimony." As he spoke, snow drifted against the windows, soft as feathers, and Evelyn thought it must be heaven's way of blessing them. When the vows came, James's voice was steady but full of feeling. "I promise to keep you warm, fed, and laughing," he said, "to never let you doubt you're wanted, to build a home where you're always safe, to love you every day of my life." Evelyn's lips trembled as she replied, "I promise to trust you, to choose you, to build a life where we're both free, to love you not because I need to, but because I want to. You gave me back my life, James. I give you my heart." There wasn't a dry eye in the church when the preacher said, "You may kiss your bride." James lifted her veil with shaking hands, touched her cheek like it was something sacred, and kissed her. The congregation erupted into applause, laughter, cheers, the sound of joy after too much sorrow. Outside, bells rang as they left the church, hand in hand, snow swirling around them like confetti. The town hall had been decorated with ribbons and lanterns, a feast laid out on long wooden tables. Fiddles played, boots stamped, people danced and clapped. James and Evelyn moved together like they'd been doing it all their lives. Awkward at first, then easy, laughter spilling freely between them. "Never thought we'd see you smile," Callahan, one of the cowboys, teased. James grinned, pulling Evelyn closer. "Never thought I'd have reason to." They cut the cake, shared toasts, and by the end of the night, Everyone in the room seemed lighter, warmer, as if the whole town had been healed by their happiness. When they finally left, stars glittered across the black sky, and the snow gleamed under the moon. Back at the cabin, James carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing softly. The fire had already been lit, the air filled with pine and smoke. He set her down gently, eyes searching hers. "We can wait, if you'd rather," he said quietly. "We've both been through enough." She smiled up at him, heart full. "I don't want to wait," she whispered. "I want this. I want you." He hesitated only a heartbeat before pulling her close, kissing her like a man who had found his home at last. The firelight danced over the walls as snow fell outside, and the world shrank to the sound of two hearts finally beating in time. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the sky clear and the air sharp with new beginnings. Evelyn woke tangled in his arms, the warmth of his skin chasing away every shadow of the past. "I never knew it could be like this," she murmured. "Like what?" he asked sleepily. "Safe," she said, smiling against his chest. "And wanted, at the same time." He kissed her forehead. "Every day, I promise." The months that followed were full of small joys and quiet work. Repairing fences, planting a spring garden, painting the cabin white. They laughed often, argued rarely, loved deeply. When autumn came, the ranch was thriving again, neighbors visiting often, their once lonely home now filled with voices and life. And then, before they knew it, Christmas returned. The next year's Eve dawned with the scent of pine and baking bread. Evelyn stood by the tree, round with child, humming softly as she hung the carved wooden bird James had given her the year before. The cabin had grown, a small room added for the baby, shelves lined with books and blankets. Outside, the world was white and peaceful. James came in with an armful of firewood, cheeks flushed from the cold, and grinned when he saw her. "How are my two favorite people?" he asked, setting the wood down. "Hungry," she teased. "Your child demands cookies." He laughed, kissing her forehead, then her belly. They sat by the fire, watching the flames. "Do you remember last Christmas?" she asked quietly. "Every detail," he said. "You were half frozen, scared out of your wits. And you told me, 'Get up. You're coming home.'" She smiled. "I thought you were crazy." "I was," he said softly. "Crazy about you." She leaned against him, content. As the night deepened, the snow began to fall again, soft and steady. In the morning, the light of Christmas Day spilled through the window. James handed her a small box wrapped in cloth. Inside were two wooden birds, wings intertwined. "Us," he said simply, her eyes filled with tears. She reached behind her chair and gave him a small leather-bound journal. "For your thoughts," she said. "I want to know everyone." He opened it to find her handwriting on the first page. "To my husband, my home, my heart. Thank you for showing me what love means." He pulled her into his arms, the baby kicking between them, and kissed her softly. They stepped outside to watch the sunrise, gold spilling over snow-dusted hills. "What will next year bring?" she asked. James smiled. "More of this. More of you. More of us." She nodded, eyes shining. "That's enough. That's everything." The camera of memory pulled back then, capturing the small cabin, smoke curling from the chimney, light glowing warm through the windows. Inside was laughter, safety, and love, the kind that endures beyond storms and seasons. And as the sun climbed higher, Evelyn's voice lingered like a whisper carried on the wind. "I came west looking for survival. I found something better. I found home."